Hello and welcome to this special Pannonian edition of Birding Earth Radio. This is your host, Gerard Spring, coming to you from the mid-latitudes. So I've been doing a little bit of traveling recently, and I've been trying to understand exactly what's been going on in the world and what's been going on with the climate system in the world. And one of the things that always comes to mind when I'm traveling around is the difficulty of the situation we're in. For some reason, the human mind and the social structure of humanity is just not really capable of dealing with our climate problem. Traveling is really quite difficult, and it's difficult for a lot of reasons, especially if you really want to get out there and see what's going on. This is not traveling to vacation destinations or dream destinations or anything like this, though I've passed through many of these destinations on my travels. I've also passed through a lot of other destinations where you see populations living in abject poverty. I've passed through very tense areas in the world. I've also passed through areas which are previous conflict zones or conflict zones which are occurring now or brewing conflicts. And when you're passing over these borders and when you're passing through these checkpoints and you're passing through these situations and seeing military personnel moving, you're seeing military aircraft flying, these types of things, it becomes really apparent that we're in a very deep, troubling situation with regards to the climate system, because it's almost as if we cannot get over ourselves. Every country feels like a prison after a while. When you visit enough countries, they all begin to feel like prisons. Within each country, everyone is more or less subject to a certain ideology, a certain way of thinking, a certain mythology of that country, and it becomes very hard to escape this ideology when you are essentially locked in that country for one reason or another. How this relates to the climate system is really indirect. It's not a direct relationship to the climate system, but ultimately it's the collective economic activity of humanity that's generated the climate problem. So, for example, when you are traveling in the Balkans, you will see lots and lots of trucks moving products from the Middle East, or from Turkey in particular, into the Balkans, and you'll also see products moving the other way. You'll also see things like large contracts being done, for example, between Serbia and the United Arab Emirates, where you have people coming over from the UAE and trying to secure deals with Serbian officials for food products, because Serbia is a very food productive region in Europe, whereas in the United Arab Emirates there's essentially no food supply. And so all of that product has to move from Eastern Europe over into the Middle East, and there has to be some logistical system to transport that product. There is a lot of CO2 going into the atmosphere, and it's going into the atmosphere worldwide. You have large shipping companies, large trucking companies, logistics companies, all moving product all the time, and they're all using the same basic infrastructure of road networks to move these products. Oftentimes, when you're getting into poorer countries, these road networks are very poorly maintained. There's a lot of truck traffic, there's a lot of stalled truck traffic, and it's just polluting. And when you start to see this, when you start to understand the logistical aspect of countries and the logistical aspect of modern society and the logistical aspect of burning all of that fuel to keep all of those trucks running all the time, all around the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it becomes very, very scary to consider what this is doing to the climate system, and it becomes very, very scary to realize that humanity as a whole is mostly helpless when it comes to dealing with this. Let me tell you, everyone, the vast majority of the people in the world are not aware of what's going on with the climate system. I really hesitate to say this, but as I've traveled and I've asked people and I've talked with people around the world, it's starting to become apparent that a lot of people are kind of not clued into what's going on. They might notice local changes in their region. For example, they might notice certain crops doing better than others, or they might notice that there's stronger storms than there was a couple of years ago or a couple of decades ago. They might notice that summers are getting hotter, or that winters are getting colder, or that the temperature swings are more violent. But the overall theme that I've noticed is that no one is able to connect it to a global picture because everyone is imprisoned in their country. Everyone is imprisoned in their country's ideology. And overall, this is something that you start to see when you travel. I want to make it clear that I'm not a globalist, and I do not believe in global government. I do not believe in global governance at all. I think that this is also another sham. And you're starting to see these types of global government and global governance ideas coming through, and you also see the negative effects of them while traveling. Global governance is not the answer to anything. What really is the answer, as I've said before, is a change in consciousness and a way of retrofitting the entire economy. We have to retrofit the way the entire economy works from the ground up in order to solve our climate system. We cannot continue to dump CO2 into the atmosphere continuously all day, all night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, all over the planet, and expect it to not have an effect on the climate system. On top of this, you also have issues of pollution, extreme amounts of pollution, wastewater mistreatment, poisoning of lakes, algal blooms in lakes and rivers, cutting off of water supplies of certain regions, glacial melts, heating on the mountain, forest fires. All of these things are occurring all over the world right now. Overall, in Central Europe, we've had a very rough start to the summer in terms of temperatures. Throughout Central Europe right now, we have a very huge temperature anomaly of about plus 10 degrees Celsius that is applied over most of Southern Europe. We have, for example, 30 degrees Celsius at 1,000 meters in the Swiss Alps in June. This is very, very hot. And in the lowlands, we have temperatures pushing 40 degrees Celsius in June. This is very, very early to see these kinds of temperatures, and a lot of these temperatures have never really been recorded in some of these regions for decades and decades and decades. And here we are in the beginning of 2017 summer seeing these kinds of temperatures. July is squaring up to be a very, very hot month in Europe. For example, already in Portugal, we've seen a lot of forest fires developing and people getting trapped on highways in forest fires. And this is quite rare, actually, in Portugal. For forest fires, of course, can occur anywhere in the world due to lightning strikes and things like this. But these large temperature anomalies are driving a lot of evaporation from the soil. So the soil is becoming depleted of water. And when this happens, you have plants drying. And when you have stronger storms due to warmer atmosphere, you have more lightning strikes, which causes more forest fires. If we swing over into the North American picture, we also have a very large temperature anomaly developing in California. And as most people are aware of in the United States, California is very, very prone to forest fires. And I'm expecting that this year we'll probably have a pretty severe fire season, despite the fact that we had a lot of rain in California this winter. It was a pretty good winter in terms of rain in California, but if we have high temperatures pushing 35 and 40 degrees Celsius, all of that water will not reach the water table. It will just evaporate out of the soil and it will go up into the atmosphere and move out of California, and we'll see drying. Also, very disturbingly, we have a tremendously huge temperature anomaly developing over central Siberia. This is a widespread area of probably 10 degrees, maybe even 15 degrees Celsius warmer than average over a tremendously large part of Siberia. Another area, again, that's very prone to forest fires, burning and drying and these types of things. In the long-term climate picture, Siberia is most likely to get warmer and wetter, but still it's interesting to see that these types of temperature anomalies are showing up. The overall global temperatures have not really warmed up that much yet. We have, on average, probably about 1 degree Celsius if you look over the year right now is what we're looking at, maybe a little bit less than that. So, but the difference is that when we have less sea ice due to that 1 degree, we destabilize the weather patterns, and the heat moves around in different places, and we start to get temperature anomalies developing in different places. And although the global average temperature has only gone up by 1 degree Celsius, the standard deviation in temperature anomalies is getting larger and larger and larger. So we're seeing larger and larger temperature anomalies as we're slowly pushing the average temperature up. So it's been really a tough journey this time on the road, folks. Traveling around in poor countries and countries that are affected by various climate issues already is really, really difficult. It's really disheartening when you start to see the level of poverty that exists in some of these places, the level of corruption that exists in some of these places, and then you connect this poverty and corruption to what's going on with the climate system. If there's no awareness of what's going on in the climate system, no one is going to fix it. And generally, a lot of people in poorer countries or in countries which have had severe economic problems or conflict zones developing within them, it's a really difficult thing to see, because they won't have the political will or economic will to really do anything. It's almost as if the entire country becomes depressed. Everyone just kind of tries to get from day to day, and they don't really care about what's going on in the long term, because they don't really have the energy to do it, because the demands of the day take so much of their energy. Imagine that. Imagine trying to live in a place where there's no hope of getting out of your country, and your average salary is, maybe a couple $100s a month. The costs of things are the same, but that's the amount of money that you're making. It's a really, really scary thing to consider. And this is the reality for a lot of people. And this is why a lot of people are trapped. Meanwhile, you have a fascist billionaire running the United States of America. It's really disturbing when you think about it. So I know that this is a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to realize that when you go out there and you see the world, that things become more hopeless. Generally, I look forward to traveling, but this time I've had a really difficult time, and I've seen a lot of things that I found really, really disturbing. The most disturbing thing that I think I saw on this particular journey was down in the Mediterranean, on the Mediterranean coast, on a beautiful Mediterranean beach. Pretty isolated beach, and on this beach I saw a dumpster full of trash that had been shipwrecked on this beach, and trash was floating out into the clear blue waters of the Mediterranean, and no one cares to pick it up. And it looked like it had been there for quite a while, perhaps a few months, maybe even a year. Complete neglect. And this is what's going on. We are literally trashing our planet. So I hope you enjoyed this short podcast. I know it's a little bit depressing, it's a little bit sad, but this is the reality of what's going on in our world, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to having you along for the next one.